Welcome to today's video, where we'll dive into the fascinating book of Daniel from the Bible. Have you ever wondered what the future holds? The book of Daniel gives us a glimpse into God's plan for the world, filled with powerful visions, prophecies, and lessons in faith. Stay with us until the end as we explore what these ancient stories can teach us today about standing firm in our beliefs. So, who wrote the book of Daniel? The book is traditionally attributed to Daniel, a Jewish prophet who was taken captive into Babylon during the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar. It was likely written between the 6th and 5th centuries BC, during a time when the Jewish people were in exile, far from their homeland. The book of Daniel is divided into two main parts. The first half, chapters 1 through 6, consists of stories about Daniel and his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, showing how they remained faithful to God while living in a foreign land. The second half, chapters 7 through 12, contains Daniel's visions and prophecies, which focus on future events and God's sovereignty over history. This book is unique in its combination of historical narratives and apocalyptic visions. But what do these prophecies really mean? What lessons can we learn from Daniel's life? Let's explore each chapter and uncover the deep truths hidden in these pages. Chapter 1. Daniel's Faithfulness. In the first chapter of Daniel, we see him and his three friends taken from Judah to Babylon. They are chosen to be trained in the king's court, where they are given rich food and wine. However, Daniel and his friends choose not to defile themselves by eating the king's food because it would go against their Jewish laws. Daniel's decision shows us the importance of remaining faithful to God, even in difficult circumstances. He and his friends ask for vegetables and water instead, and God honors their faithfulness, making them healthier and wiser than the other young men in the king's training. The lesson is that no matter where we are or what we face, we can stand firm in our faith and trust God to guide us. Chapter 2. King Nebuchadnezzar's Dream. In chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar has a troubling dream that none of his wise men can interpret. Daniel prays to God, and God reveals the dream and its meaning to him. The dream is of a large statue made of different materials: gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay. Each material represents a different kingdom in history, with the gold head symbolizing King Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, Babylon. Daniel interprets the dream, showing that while all these kingdoms will rise and fall, God's kingdom will last forever. Nebuchadnezzar is amazed and honors Daniel. The lesson is that God is in control of history and will bring his eternal kingdom to pass, no matter what kingdoms rise and fall in the world. Chapter 3. The Fiery Furnace. In chapter 3, King Nebuchadnezzar builds a giant golden image and commands everyone to bow down and worship it. Daniel's three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, refuse to bow to the idol. In response, Nebuchadnezzar orders them to be thrown into a fiery furnace. But when they are thrown into the furnace, they are unharmed. To everyone's amazement, a fourth figure appears in the fire with them, protecting them. The king praises their God for delivering them. The lesson is that God is faithful to protect his followers when they stand firm in their beliefs, even in the face of persecution. Chapter 4. Nebuchadnezzar's Madness. In chapter 4, King Nebuchadnezzar has another dream, this time of a large tree that is cut down. Daniel interprets the dream, revealing that the king will go mad for a time as a consequence of his pride, but he will be restored when he acknowledges that God is the true ruler of all. True to the dream, Nebuchadnezzar becomes like an animal, living in the wilderness until he humbles himself and praises God. His sanity is restored, and he recognizes God's sovereignty. The lesson is that pride comes before a fall, but humility before God leads to restoration and peace. Chapter 5. The Writing on the Wall. In chapter 5, Nebuchadnezzar's son, Belshazzar, holds a feast using the sacred vessels from the temple in Jerusalem. During the feast, a mysterious hand writes on the wall, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. Daniel is called to interpret the message, which foretells the end of Belshazzar's reign and the fall of Babylon. That very night, the Persian army overtakes the city. The lesson is that God's judgment is sure, and we must honor him in all things. Chapter 6. Daniel in the lion's den. In chapter 6, Daniel becomes a high official in the Persian Empire. Some of his enemies plot to have him thrown into a lion's den by tricking the king into making a law that no one can pray to anyone but the king. Daniel, remaining faithful, continues to pray to God. He is thrown into the den of lions, but God shuts the lions' mouths, and Daniel emerges unharmed the next morning. The lesson is that God rewards faithfulness, even in the face of life-threatening challenges. Chapter 7. Daniel's vision of the four beasts. In chapter 7, Daniel dreams of four beasts emerging from the sea. Each beast represents a different kingdom. The lion with eagle's wings symbolizes Babylon. The bear represents Medo-Persia. The leopard stands for Greece. And the terrifying fourth beast represents Rome and future empires. Daniel also sees the Ancient of Days, God, judge the beasts, and a kingdom is established for God's people that will last forever. The lesson is that earthly kingdoms rise and fall, but God's eternal kingdom will stand forever. Chapter 8. The vision of the ram and the goat. In chapter 8, Daniel sees a ram and a goat. The ram represents the Medo-Persian Empire, and the goat represents the Greek Empire. The goat defeats the ram, symbolizing Alexander the Great's conquest of Persia. After Alexander's death, his empire is divided into four parts. A little horn grows, symbolizing a king who will persecute God's people, often linked to Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes, but also pointing to a future oppressive ruler. The lesson is that God is in control of history, even when evil rulers rise, and he will bring justice. Chapter 9. The 70 Weeks Prophecy. In chapter 9, Daniel receives the prophecy of the 70 weeks, which outlines God's plan for Israel. The prophecy predicts the coming of the Messiah and the destruction of Jerusalem. The final week, 7 years, refers to future tribulation and the coming of God's eternal kingdom. This prophecy connects the first coming of Christ to the future return and establishment of God's kingdom. The lesson is that God has a detailed plan for history, and the Messiah is central to his plan. Chapter 10. Daniel's vision of a man. In chapter 10, Daniel sees a glorious man, likely an angel, whose appearance is overwhelming. The angel explains that spiritual warfare delayed his arrival, but that God has heard Daniel's prayers. The chapter highlights the unseen spiritual battles taking place on behalf of God's people. The lesson is that our prayers are heard, and spiritual forces are at work behind the scenes. Chapter 11. The Kings of the North and South. Chapter 11 details the ongoing conflict between the Seleucid and Ptolemaic dynasties, symbolized by the kings of the North and South. As the prophecy unfolds, it also points to a future king, often linked to the Antichrist, who will oppress God's people. This ruler's reign will be short, as God will ultimately bring judgment and establish his kingdom. The lesson is that despite the turmoil and oppression in history, God's ultimate victory is assured. Chapter 12. The Time of the End. In the final chapter, Daniel is told that a time of great distress will come, but the faithful will be delivered. There will be a resurrection, some will rise to eternal life, others to disgrace. Daniel is told to seal up the prophecy until the time of the end, but those who remain faithful will be rewarded with eternal life. The lesson is that while challenges may come, there is hope for those who remain faithful, as God will bring ultimate justice. In summary, The book of Daniel is filled with powerful visions and prophecies that point to God's sovereignty over history and His plan for the future. From Daniel's faithfulness in the face of trials to his visions of the coming of God's eternal kingdom, we are reminded that no matter what happens in the world, God is in control. We can trust that God's plan will come to pass even when we don't fully understand it. The book of Daniel encourages us to remain faithful, knowing that God will ultimately bring justice and establish His kingdom forever. So, what has the story of Daniel taught you? How does this journey of faith relate to your life today? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found something meaningful today, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell.